imagination about the river.
Mm-hmm.
And the values and the birds that describe the values. So
Mm-hmm.
that was my point the last 2 weeks. So
Mm-hmm. So you found that very helpful.
Yeah, yes, it was.
Very nice. And are there any words that are coming to life for you to help you connect with the ideas of your values? Or is it still sort of unclear what those words might be?
Surprisingly, in the beginning it was quite clear, and then it got cloudy. You know what I mean? It was, yeah. And then I did the exercise you gave us with the breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was peace and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I stood there and said, okay, oh, it's trust. It felt so right.
Mm.
Yeah, and then I switched it, and that was it. And then the second one, I'm not sure about that. That is working. So.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, and watch that feeling. Like I remember one of my teachers, Gary, he was guiding us through a visualization using a word. So sort of embodying the word and moving it through the body. And he gave a warning about choosing the words, because you had it when you heard the word trust, you felt it.
Yeah.
And he said once he guided a session and he used the word joy, and there was somebody in the group who had an ex-wife and her name was Joy. Oh. And so in the middle of this, peaceful exercise, like, so we can use these physical sensations and responses to words to really understand the response of the whole physiology, which is really interesting. Whether it's a positive reaction like yours or a painful one like joy, it's something to learn each time. Welcome Lindsay and Lori and Jackie, who are together camping. And Lotta should be with us as well. So once everybody's ready to tune in, hi Lindsay, we'll begin.
Hello.
Hello. And you know what, let's begin in this quiet space that we spoke about last week. And let me shift my software here so you'll just see my face, at least in the recording for now. So before we go to the talking part, let's just come back to the body. So we're all starting from the same space. This is the bowing into the Dharma room of Zoom, that we can make it beautiful, even though it's something we have no choice which to do. So feel the sensations around you. Lori and Jackie in this, I'm guessing, beautiful location, camping somewhere, even expanding more into that tactile sensation of being close to nature in a place that you've chosen. And when we're at home, we can take that same reverence to tune our nervous system, our senses into the space where we reside. If you haven't already, notice the breath moving in and out. Notice the response of your body to stop and just feel. So this is a practice I do in every single class, and my own practice, of course. It is this moment to intentionally stop the habitual moving and thinking, to simply watch what's there and to be comfortable in that space of watching. So everybody here has been a practitioner for a period of time. And even no matter what we practice, all of these traditions have this quality of turning towards this stillness. And when people are new to my classes, there's sometimes this uncomfortableness. You can see it in the body sometimes, of sitting and not being able to just feel. So that's not good, not bad. It's just what is. So each time I do it, it's a different exercise. My mind is looking to escape, or if it's easy to be still. And then just briefly, intentionally deepen your breath. And notice the response. Notice the sensations of the muscles moving, changes in your posture. Noticing even sensations of tension or relaxation that may come and go with the changing of the breath. And just opening mantra to acknowledge our community of people wherever they may be across this earth. Catherine waking up in Hilo, Mirka in Maui with some of our friends from this community. Oh, Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Punaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvina Vatitamastu, Mavipishavahai. Oh, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So before we sort of move into the slide into the next topic, I would say, just reminding our minds sort of where we've been. So as we talked with Melanie at the beginning, first session, just sort of check in to the language with which we organize our perspective and our perceptions about how we move through this life, what's important to us. And as Melanie pointed out, sometimes certain words really just resonate within you. For her, it was the word trust, was a visceral sensation. And so I hope that for those of you who had inspired, that this is a continuing sequence of looking for those words or working with those words to see how they feed you. And this is the heart of mantra, whether that mantra is given to you or by a teacher or given to you from birth or given to you from the traditions from which you come. And then last week we looked at how our internal attitudes can impact our relationship with what's happening around us. So again, I chose 4 concepts in the tradition of yoga from the teachings of Patanjali, also in the Buddhist traditions. These concepts of Maitri, Karuna, Mudito, Upekshana. In the follow-up practice I recorded on Wednesday and put on our playlist, I did a version of that practice in English as well. And something that Heather pointed out which we'll actually get into a little bit today, when we talked about sukha and upekshanam, or sukha and mudito, we brought these attitudes within the body, and compassion and equanimity we sort of kept space for above and below us. As Heather mentioned, with her constitution, with her personality, that she can easily be overwhelmed with empathy. And so the concept of having compassion for suffering, but having that capacity to keep a distance to stop the overwhelm for somebody who's sensitive is sort of the direction we're moving into today. So before we begin, I just wanted to open up and see if anybody has any thoughts or insights or questions just about those two sessions so far. Okay, then I will give a little bit more information, and I can see we're finding our flow. So I present some ideas and then you guys have some great feedback afterwards. So we'll keep it going. And as always, it's my attempt is to try to tie it together, because it's really one idea, and what's evolving from this is sort of a way to revisit the Eightfold Path of Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, through just a slightly different lens. And the focus that I intended today was looking at our relationship with our nervous system. And so there's a transition today. The first two sessions were sort of about attitudes and inner orientations. And now we're moving into working with the physiology. And you know, my Zen teacher, he says that, you know, the practice of Zen is quite rigid in the lineage that he passes on. And he says, you know, the practice is like a frame, and we use that frame to sort of orient ourselves. And I think one of the gifts of these traditions is that there's still the frame, but we recognize that frame is hanging upon an existing structure. And we cultivate an awareness about what that structure is, because that frame will hang differently depending on the structure where it is. And I find that there is a tremendous softness that comes from that perspective in this tradition, which called me to it. And so I want to start with a quote from an author, a German author, Ulrich Beyer. Is this, I think, how an American would say it, Ulrich Beyer. And he translated these writings of Rilke, and he expressed something so beautifully that captured something about something Catherine shared in the first session before the audio cut her out, but something it touched me as well. He was a person who was living in New York City on September 11th, 2001. And of that time, he said, I experienced the great disequilibrium of those months as violent changes imposed upon me from the outside against my will. So this idea that a circumstance fundamentally changed his perception, how he was experiencing life. And so I wanted to get in a little bit to the physiology. I'm no neuroscientist. I have a very high level before I would call myself an expert on something. So I'm not at all an expert on neuroscience or anything like that. But to get into the nervous system, we have to consider a little bit of the physiology of the brain body, mind body. One of my favorite quotes from Leslie Kaminoff is that the body and mind are not connected. They're the same thing, which I think is a great way of thinking about it. So we talk about mind, we talk about body, it's all the same. And so this week we'll sort of go more deeply into this kind of theoretical idea. And next week will be more experiential to sort of tap into these systems by doing things with them more. So the analogy I wanted to use was a technical analogy. So depending on how comfortable you are with computer lingo, this may annoy you or you may enjoy it. Lotta can get back to me on how accurate I am. She's quite adept with these things. And I want to consider, if you have, any kind of technical device, there's essentially three pieces to it. There's the hardware, which is the physical stuff. For humans, I like to call this the bag of meat in which we live in. And hi, Heather. And then there is what makes this paperweight actually function. And that's primarily what's called software. It's information that a human being has translated into a language and put inside of this hardware, and it brings it to life. And then there's something in between called firmware. Firmware is a physical thing that's been programmed and then stuck inside of this device. Software is easier to update and change and things like that than firmware. A great example is a colleague of mine. He works to represent the United States in a large meeting where they organize technical collaborations about sharing bandwidth in the electromagnetic spectrum. So your phones, everything that sends out signals, we've agreed upon globally how they send out signals and what kind of signals they send out. It's a messy, messy job. It's very bureaucratic, but my friend loves it. But one of the things he's responsible for is trying to get rid of the leap second. And this sounds like, I think it's the greatest job title ever. His job is to get rid of the leap second. So we have a leap year. Once every 4 years, we add a day, and that sort of catches the calendar up with what the sun is doing, because our calendar is an approximation of the solar cycle. But we have satellites up orbiting the Earth that control things like our GPS and impact stuff on life on Earth. And that programming needs to be a little bit more precise with time than what our calendar is. And so the satellites right now, they do what's called a leap second every year. They change, or every once in a while. I don't even know how often it is, but they have to change and add a second once in a while to catch up their calendar to the actual time of the sun. Certain satellites from certain countries like the United States, all they have to do is write a program, send it up to the satellite, and it'll change. They can remove the leap second, it won't be a big problem. But countries like China, the USSR, they have firmware up in their satellites that includes a leap second. So they can't change it from the ground. So there's a big controversy, controversy that nobody hears about, but there's a controversy in these fields about whether we can change a leap second, because firmware is something you can't change easily. So all of this is to say, we have firmware. So we're going to talk about our firmware and our software and how we can access it. So luckily, we are not satellites up in the air. We have the capacity and some neuroplasticity to potentially do some upgrades to our firmware. So when I'm talking about firmware, there's a phrase in behavioral neuroscience called epigenetics. So epigenetics is the reality that we are born with traits from our ancestors in the genes that we have in our body. The genes have been programmed to respond and evolve in a particular way as we grow up. So that's, from birth. In addition, when we're in our mother's belly, there are environmental things that can change how our brains form and our nervous systems form. And as children as well, we sort of get programmed, hardwired, as you will, for our brain to develop in a particular way. These are sort of the three big impacts: the environmental impacts, the early childhood impacts, and what we're just born with, the genetics of our ancestors. And these three aspects of our nervous system are essentially our firmware. So we can, as we come into life and we interact with people and we learn things, you know, those are things that can change with time. But there's an aspect of ourselves that is a little more hardwired in. And so that's sort of the firmware of our body. And it's tied in with everything, and it impacts how we learn, it impacts how we relate, it impacts all of these aspects of our being. And one of the books I've been connecting with these thoughts is, some of you probably know Robert Sapolsky. He's a behavioral scientist. He wrote one of his books that I know Gary recommends is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So it talks about stress responses and things like that. He has a new book out called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Our Worst. It's like a massive book. And he points to some great examples of behavioral science and about how little choices we really have in how we behave. He's a little pessimistic. I'm not quite as pessimistic as he is. You know, he really argues there is no free will, because they can pinpoint in your brain how you make each decision. But I like to be more positive than that. He, for example, he pointed out that people who are descended from nomadic tribes hundreds of years ago. So if your ancestors were nomadic tribes who herded animals, there is a very strong likelihood that you are a more individual type of person, and that the concept of honor is something that's a little more powerful with you. Whereas if you are the descendant of people who were more agrarian, so they grew lots of crops, stayed in the same area, there's less of that typically in the people who are descendants of those communities. Mainly because if your livelihood depended upon your animals and somebody stole your animals, that's a much bigger impact than somebody stealing a bit of corn or something like that. So scarcity of food really drove cultural behaviors. And even though we may be far removed from these cultures, some of those traits are still within us. Likewise, if your ancestors came from the desert, you're more likely to be monotheistic, believe in one God. Whereas if your ancestors are from the rainforest, there's more polytheism or a different concept of God. And even how mothers speak to their babies in collective cultures versus more individualistic cultures is different. From the moment you're born, mothers interact differently with their babies. So these traits are carried down through hundreds of years. We see it in the United States with the part of the emphasis on looking at different communities and how the history of our country have impacted different communities. So if we look at the awakening last year with the elevation of the Black Lives Matter movement, one of my friends here asked me to talk to teenagers about racism in the US. I had 1 hour. So in 1 hour, I talked about essentially the inheritance of racism of the United States. I actually made a website. If anybody's interested, I have links about that. But one of the messages is that it's not just something now, it's something that has been inherited, on socioeconomic levels, but also on a very physiological level. And so we're carrying all of this forward. And what that means is that much of how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, and how we behave with those perceptions is driven more by what we have inherited than what we choose to do. And this is really the focus of religions and spiritual traditions. This is honestly why they exist in my perspective, because overcoming that firmware is extremely challenging. And so the foundation really of a lot of the what we start to call internal work, or this transition from attitudes to physiology, really connects with how can we reach into this firmware or even acknowledge it. So one of the aspects of racism that I mentioned in this German class was the capacity to acknowledge. So, for example, was a great study, it's been repeated several times, many times, that if you are shown a face of a person and that person looks like you, you're very likely to have a neutral response. If that person looks different than you, you're very likely to have a fear response, a visceral response. This is not a choice, it's just what your brain does. There are exceptions, but generally, most people respond in this way. One of the ways to change this response is to point out that this bias exists in your mind. And just awareness changes the physiological reaction of the brain of participants. This is actually a theme that I worked on a lot when I was working in the government on science funding, was priming people to look at things with the understanding that bias exists. And one of the ways, of course, there are other ways, which is simply to grow up with more people. Like places like Hawaii are much more multicultural than many other areas in the US. And people's primal and visceral response to one another is a bit different. So this capacity to change is I'll call neuroplasticity here. That's sort of a broad term. Just means that your brain changes. It changes a lot when you're a little baby, but we're not dead yet. So as long as our meat is alive, there's the capacity for change. And our spiritual communities and traditions emphasize, I think, this concept of neuroplasticity with what they call practice. Because there's no spiritual tradition, at least in ancient ways. There might be some Instagram spiritual traditions that are different than this, but the ones that have been around for a while, there is a concept of practice. There's a concept of repetition. They're either through different techniques or just the concept of doing something over and over and over and over again. And there's the concept of community. So these two fundamental concepts, I think, really touch on this concept of neuroplasticity. Community as in a chosen group of people sharing the values that you share, and then reinforcing the values that you feel are really the core of who you are. And in addition to community in practice, I think the third foundational point of these traditions is a concept of something greater than yourself. So in yoga, Buddhism, this concept of true nature or of godlikeness within, something immutable, something that is behind the programming, behind the software and the firmware. And to me, this speaks to this concept of a nervous system in stasis, a nervous system that is balanced. And two of the main ways to touch upon these ideas. So community is community. This is a challenging concept because community can potentially reinforce your programming or can help you break free of it. And I'll go into a little bit, so some of the details of this. So when I said we come into this space and we pause for a minute, that pausing is a really important tool. At the very short term, waiting long enough literally lets your brain come into a different space, different part of your brain actually functioning. So I'll just talk about these two parts. The amygdala in the brain is is one of the oldest evolutionary parts of the brain. The response of this part of your brain, that's the part of the brain that when it sees somebody who doesn't look like you, your fear's already up. Neurons are firing in this part of the brain, the amygdaloid response. It happens in milliseconds, like that. Before you can think, before anything, your body, that is your body warning you. It is a great thing if you're living in a war zone. If you live in a culture that has experienced war in the generation of the people who are still alive, you'll see it. I see it in Germany since I've been here in a way that I never recognized it before. I see it in my children who've inherited a very awake nervous system. And there is a watchfulness there, which it becomes a cultural trait, and it's not good, it's not bad. It's just the recognition of what we're working with. And so when I teach here, when I teach mostly Germans, the emphasis is often on resting, not because they don't need to work, but I find that Germans know how to work, and they know how to push, and they know how to keep going. But what's not very well balanced here is sometimes the capacity to let go and rest. And this is true for many cultures, but it's one that I find in here. And so, so this is the amygdaloid response. This is the awake of the nervous system. It is the bias of our genetics, the bias of our ancestors, and the bias of really the culture into which we were born. One of the ways to short circuit it in social terms, like I said, is just the awareness that you're responding to situations with this response. And the second is to recognize other human beings are individual people and not from a group. But the way we work with it in these traditions that I find really useful is this capacity to stop. And something I'm teaching my own children, because we have a practice of taking a breath. The breath itself is useful, but in that moment, the time it takes to take a breath is enough time for the brain to shift. And we can shift the brain to the frontal cortex. So the frontal cortex is the newest piece of our brain, evolutionarily. It takes about 2 seconds for it to kick in. So it's definitely like, it can't compete with the amygdala. The amygdala is always going to be faster. But if we give it space, we might find that our initial response is not in alignment with what we choose. An important thing to realize about this part of the brain is it doesn't fully develop until about 25 years old. And so you'll see, for example, in younger people, more risk, not so risk adverse behaviors that happen. And this part of our brain is also the part of our brain that keeps us safe in the context of the community in which we live. So this part of the brain grows while learning, okay, I can behave this way and I'm not allowed to behave this way. So it also contains some of the cultural programming on a more sophisticated level than the amygdala. So amygdala is saving us from the lion trying to kill us, and the frontal cortex is saving us from becoming one of the witches they burn at the stake, you know, somewhere different cultural dangers, right? And so this pause becomes, it becomes a doorway for entering into a different state of mind. What we do from that state of mind can change, but that's sort of the foundation of this technique. And then extended pause, what we call intentional resting. Yoga Nidra is the yoga traditional practice of this. Or even the Vipassana or Zen sitting traditions of inviting the body to be still and allowing the mind to either focus on one simple thing or letting the mind be a little less focused and just sort of, I call it fuzzy-minded sometimes. this can be in contradiction to how we have been trained to survive and live in this world and in our communities. One person, I saw a person who did her first Zen sitting with our teacher, and it was about 20, 25 minutes the first time. And she just expressed how uncomfortable and unnatural it felt. And he pointed out that, all I asked you to do was nothing. Like, it's hard to do many things. Now it's just sitting and feel your breath. That's really against all of how our nervous system is programmed to do. We're surviving. So this is sort of an intentional practice that is the antithesis of our evolution to survive. And so what do we find in ourselves when we intentionally work against that evolutionary momentum? I don't have the answer for that, but that's, this is the con of the Zen teaching. What am I when I'm not that? And so the methods of Yoga Nidra is resting, lying down. We've all practiced that. So the body is at rest. Guided version of this practice is to have a voice that your mind can follow. So it's a light following of the voice. And what most of us do when we first start this practice is the body rests, the mind can relax, and we fall asleep. And because that's what we do. When we lay down, we relax, that's time to sleep. But there's a level of this, at least for me, it was weeks when I first did an intensive exploration of this practice. The first 3 weeks, I think, I just fell asleep every time. Like sometimes I fell asleep later, but eventually I fell asleep every time. After that 3 weeks, something began to change. And I wasn't quite asleep, but I wasn't quite awake. The body was very rested, and the mind was soft and fuzzy in a way that's atypical of normal ways of being. And with some more practice of that, the Yoga Nidra continues to be a really great tool that I use a lot, sometimes guided by an external voice, sometimes my own. But what I've found is that I've cultivated the capacity to lie down at any point in the day, and my body recognizes that deep resting space. So it's a potential to come into it more. My nervous system comes into it more easily, even just 5 minutes or so before I can come back out. But it's a practice because it is really against our programming. And all of this intentional pause, this long pause of deep relaxation, which for the Vinaya Yoga people, according to Mirka, this wasn't a practice that Desikachar taught. Yoga, it wasn't under the name Yoga Nidra. There were guided relaxations, but this charm of Yoga Nidra sort of came through a different tradition, if I understand it right. But it becomes a very powerful way to sort of reprogram the nervous system to a very deep parasympathetic state. And we know that, well, I should say modern physiology and neuroscience is catching up to what we already know from the yoga traditions, that this deep capacity to rest has a tremendous impact on our system. Because the other main tool that we have in these traditions that really tap into our firmware is the breathing. And this will be of interest to you, Melanie, given your experiences with the pranayama series we did together. I'll send you the full quote from Podolsky's book, but he does a great summary of essentially why the breath is so important on a physiological, neurological level. And he's talking about the vagus nerve, so the pair of nerves from the autonomic nervous system that is connected with basically all your vital organs. And in the 90s, the term was developed called polyvagal theory, which looks at how the vagus nerve and stimulation or relaxation of this nerve impacts our health. And as I was reading up for this, for tonight, you know, the medical scientists, they come up with great ideas sometimes, like, oh, if we cut the nerve, we can do this. Just reading it was making me go, oh no, don't cut the nerve. But, you know, so the yogis are coming through it from the, you know, they're reverse engineering it, the yoga therapists coming in. Okay, so if we're doing practices that have an impact on the efficiency of this system of nerves in the body, how is that then impacting our state of health? You know, because every time we're inhaling, we're slightly raising the heart rate. Every time we're exhaling, we're slowly lowering the heart rate just a bit. And this variability between increase and the decrease gives an indication of sort of what's happening with the vagus nerve. That's the idea behind the application of this. And so this, from the yoga tradition, we all know this, the ratio of pranayama, the ratio of inhale to exhale. Do we need to stimulate the system? Do we need to relax the system? But like with resting, it has to do with balancing, and also very much, we'll talk about next week a little bit more, the function of even the muscles. So our meat system, whether it's the nerves or the muscles themselves, is never static. It always has to do with balance, the yin and the yang kind of concept. So with the vagal nerve stimulation or relaxation, it has to have the capacity to do both. If it's in a constant high state of stimulation, that's keeping us in a high stress state. If it's too depressed, then there's a lack of activity able. Same way with muscles, and same way with thinking. So, you know, the reason I talk about deep resting more so than vigorous physical activity is generally in modern communities, physical activity is rewarded on some level. So the doing is celebrated. It can go on Instagram, it can, you know, be celebrated, and then YouTube and things like that. But these practices of inner practices, they balance out that part. And generally speaking, I'm finding more of us, you know, looking at myself and those that I know, more of us can benefit from looking towards the opposite end of the spectrum, the place that's not spoken about too much, the place that's not shared, because ultimately it's a very individual experience, this resting. And same with pranayama, with breathing, with finding that balance of stimulation and relaxation. And so as we do these breathing exercises, it becomes a biofeedback device. It becomes the way in which we can perceive the state of our own nervous system just by breathing, by chanting. Last week, as I was beginning practice, I chanted and realized something about my voice, because I know my voice now very well. And so these, as we rest, as we breathe intentionally, it touches in for all of us into the firmware, the set of our nervous system. And ideally, in the way that I practice and the way that I teach, is that we use this information not as a way to judge or fix or change ourselves, but to notice the gift that we have received of this nervous system, because it's here, because it's kept us alive to this moment. It's kept us stable. It's kept us in relationships. And if we act as if it's in a different state than it really is, then the effectiveness of our practice is decreased. Like for me, I have one child who is sort of, I would call her neurotypical. She's very outgoing and social. And I have one child who it took me a while to realize that she's not quite typical neurologically. She didn't speak. She sort of had a bit of selective mutism. her nervous system would shut down when she would talk to strangers. And when she was young, you know, you do things with kids, you sign them up for this class and you do this, and it never worked right. And it took me a while to realize, oh wait, I'm treating this child as if her nervous system is some way, but her nervous system is in a different way. And so what I was doing was creating stress for her, which was amplifying the condition with which she already had at this moment. So there was some unwinding that had to be done to sort that out a little bit. And now, you know, I have a child who's perfectly normal because of who she is. We know the context of her normality, but what was normal to her might not be normal to other children. And until we sort of came into alignment with that, there were challenges being created just by me and my lack of awareness, and her perception of herself. So when we look at ourselves in that way, it's important to see ourselves for who we are, not just physically. Sometimes we can see, okay, you know, my shoulders, I have to watch out, they're a little sore. But when we really look down, well, you know, if a man raises his voice, that kind of triggers me and I can't really think straight at that point. You know, like we use this nervous system to carry us through the world. So this is really the foundation of what I would call, you know, the entrance into pranayama, working with really the nervous system and the state of the body and energetics at the same time. So this is sort of the talky theoretical part. I want to give you guys a moment to sort of digest and reflect a little bit here, and then we can speak and maybe do a little bit of breathing together. Then, wait a second. We'll change this here. Okay. So is that clear for everyone? Does anybody have any questions or thoughts? There's Jackie.
Well, I'll just say that was fascinating, Tammy. You just added a layer of why to practice yoga, or how I can change my practice that I obviously need to absorb and live with. But I think that there was something profound that just happened to me while you were talking. So thank you.
Well, and for you, particularly Jackie, this time of your life, you know, I didn't get into identity too much, but as we transitioned from whatever our professional realm was to this time of retirement, which is essentially figuring out what our new professional realm is, there's also impacts of identity and how our nervous system has formed to relate to this world. It's a really powerful time to do that work.
Yeah, there's a lot of conditioning that needs to be unconditioned, but I do think that thinking about it in terms of my own nervous system, again, instead of thinking of yoga as something I'm doing to fix or try something or that's external, it's really all internal. So yeah, something very profound just happened. Thanks.
Okay. Well, and I was contacted with a colleague, and I sort of at the middle of 2020, we had this idea of this project we wanted to do, and then we sort of both lost touch. We just sort of stopped reaching out, and we're both aware enough to realize nobody needed to apologize for that. It was sort of something, and what I wrote to her was, you know, I haven't been in touch because all of my energy is kind of going to maintaining my nervous system right now, because that was sort of where I was at that point. And as you know, as Catherine spoke of the after her father's medical condition and sort of the reality that life just changed suddenly, there was this sensation of like, what if it all changes again? What if everything falls apart again? And that for me, that's what's happening to me now. I still have that in the back of my mind coming forward as a yoga teacher in this new world. And that's the impact of these trauma events. The whole corona time is like a slow rolling trauma on many levels that's sort of altering us. And so with each transition now, that's the way that I've practiced it. And this is really because of the work with Mirka in the past decade now, her and I've been working together. It's really taken me inward to use the state of my nervous system as the foundation of everything else that comes. So, Heather, did you have something to share?
Yeah, excuse me. I just wanted to say that what you spoke to really impacted me profoundly too at this point in my life, being a mom of young children. And a theme that has come up for me as far as the Sankalpa goes is growing that space so that as a parent, I can respond rather than react. And it just hit me so deeply to hear that we inherit these things. And I have inherited my hot temper. And it just opened up this feeling of understanding and acceptance and compassion for myself, but also for the people from whom I inherited these things from. It's so helpful to hear that these things are here to protect us, to keep us safe, to keep us alive. And also the beauty of our brain makes it possible to inquire about these things and to examine them and to use these tools to help grow that pause. Like you said, with your kids, you have that practice of pausing and breathing. So this is so helpful just to find that heart of compassion for myself. So thank you.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, that yeah, man, having small kids is really a way to help you see your nervous system in a new way. And that gentleness of yourself. I have one child who I can see my character traits in, and I have one child, I don't know where she came from. And she apparently came from Mirka. So Mirka has been a tremendous help to understand this child who can identify her emotions. I have my other child, she's like, I think I have a feeling. I don't know what it is, but I think there's something there. And the other one is like, no, I'm angry now. And this is why I'm angry. And it's beautiful to see, but she's my child, she's not me. And so, so having that compassion to see yourself with as much love as you see your own children, no matter how they are. There's an openness. We stretch ourselves as parents to try our best to be open to all of the fullness that our children offer us. And and for me, like, I really am enamored with scientific investigation, not because I think it negates the emotional, compassionate reality of life, but for me, it really amplifies it. It's a way of reinforcing what we're finding in this human experience. One of my pet peeves is when people misrepresent science and create things, because I think when you really know the science, you don't have to create anything. What science understands to this point, which is not everything, but what it understands to this point is amazing. Like the fact that we can look at our brains and see, how we make decisions, on a very fundamental level. Like in Podolsky's book, he speaks about, a large percentage of people who are on death row had injury to the frontal cortex. An injury to that part of your brain leads to more violent behavior. So, you know, then we have to look at things like guilt and blame and shame. And, you know, is there any of it? You know, children who grow up in poverty and the stress of poverty, their brains form in a different way than children who grow up in privileged households and communities. And, you know, how do we support these kids? How do we, you know, all of these things that it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, like, we're one of those statistics. We're all a statistic, really. We don't feel that way, but it's almost like, I get a break because it's not all about me. It's not all about my choices. Like, I am surrounded in the humanity, you know, this samskaras, this ocean of humanity is, you know, this for me is what I see when I read about the behavioral sciences. It's like, this is what the ancients were talking about. This is the river of the ocean of humanity in which we swim and sail. And sometimes we can, you know, we can sail in a direction we want, and sometimes the storm is taking us in this other direction. And learning to understand that, I think, is really the foundation of nurturing our system. And you know, and as a mother, we're going to go in 2 weeks. We'll do a little bit of things that I practiced more since having small children, because it changed my nervous system really profoundly. I sleep differently. I don't know if you all who've had kids, for me, you know, from the time I first was born, there is a lightness to my sleep, that quality of like the mom always hearing every sound. Now it's gone. It's like she's 13 now, so it's finally gotten better for me. But it really took a while for that capacity. My husband, it lasted about a month, and then he could sleep like a brick again. And ways that I've had to nurture my nervous system because of that, because I need sleep. And so yoga nidra has become one of those practices that became vital for me to help my nervous system let know that I don't have any babies in the house anymore. I don't need to hear every sound. That it's okay. It can sleep now. Yeah, so we'll go into a little bit more of that. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Okay. So let's switch over here. Okay. Oh, wait. Hey, I accidentally. Oh, there I am. Okay. Now I can see you guys. All right. So we're just going to touch upon these ideas. So this is sort of a precursor to working with the body. Not a precursor. It is working with the body, just on a deeper level. So again, just sitting. Hearing my dog, I call him my little amygdala because he's always on guard. He's always watching. He's warning me, alert, something's going on. He's waking up the neighborhood right now. So let's begin then just by sitting, coming back, letting the mind soften just a bit. So whatever ideas came to you, whatever inspirations came to you, they've all been recorded. You can watch them again. They're not gone. So just come into the sensations of your body, whatever state your body's in. So Heather has her beloved in her arms. That is your perfect sitting posture right now. Find your breath. Oh, he has a balloon. That's even better. He's doing his own pranayama. Good. Let's do the balloon pranayama. So as you feel ready to begin to breathe a little deeper, take in a deep breath. And just let the breath out through the lips if you like, or through the nose. So just continue breathing in and out. Let me just get my little notebook here. Just taking a few breaths, focusing a little bit on the exhale. And then for those of you who are able, who don't have a baby on your lap, you can maybe come towards the mat, and we'll come onto the hands and knees for a moment. Just change my camera here so you can see a little better towards the floor. So come on to the hands and knees. And Lori and Jackie, whatever adaptations you have to do to suit your camper space, we're just going to do Chakravakasana, some simple forward folds, so seated or whatever way you like. And we're going to use some sound here. So you're going to inhale here, exhale, move back. And as you move back, once you're finished your exhale, just make the sound ma until you have no more air, and then inhale. So exhaling everything out. Then after the exhale, ma. So the voice is empty. Exhaling. Then find it, ma. As long as you have air left, just keep making the sound. Once the sound is complete, come back up and do it one more time. So you'll be moving at your own rhythm here. And then we can do a little bit of Vajrasana. So standing on the knees or standing on the feet, whichever feels more comfortable to you. So if you're on a hard surface and you don't want to stand on the knees, just stand on the feet. Either way, same principle. We're going to inhale the arms up, exhale down, 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 down. After the exhale, once it's all gone, all the way up, and then all the way back down. After the exhale, do that a couple more times. And really see if you can get that last sound out. Notice the sensations in your belly as you really try to find that last vowel. Empty, empty, empty belly. Complete one more round of this posture, and then we'll lie down on the back. And when we lie down, if you'd like to keep the feet on the floor and the knees bent, just support your low back, feel free to do that. And if it's comfortable for your body, to stretch the legs out, you can do that as well. And so on the back, we're going to move on exhale. So you're going to take a breath in. On exhale, just move the arms, lift over your head. Imagine like you're making the sound ah, ma after exhale, but just finding space. Let the inhale come from here. And exhale, just a regular exhale down. So the movement is stay on inhale. Exhale, move the arms over the head to the floor behind you. After the exhale, keep exhaling, this time without the mantra, but the sensation in the belly, like you're finding that last vowel sound for ma. Then when you're ready, let the inhale come and exhale, bring the arms back. Just do that 2 more times on your own. Moving on exhale. After exhale, let that space come. Engage the belly like you're trying to extend that space after exhale. And then from here, we're going to come into a little bit of Dvipadapitam, a little bridge pose. Similar concept here. We're going to move on exhale, hold on inhale. So inhale, stay in this position with the back on the floor. Exhale, lift the arms, lift the back as high as is comfortable. Extend the space after exhale. Let the inhale come when it's ready. And exhale all the way back down. Let the inhale come as it's ready. Exhale, lift into Dvipadapitam. Empty space after exhale, pulling the belly in, empty, 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 empty. And then when the inhale's ready, let it come. Exhale everything out, come all the way down. Just do 2 more rounds like that. Moving on exhale. In that quiet space after the exhale, I am patient. So rather than take a deep breath, wait for it. When you've completed the last round, just roll over to lying on the belly. And so we'll look again for that extended suspension, this time in a little bit of a back bend from the other way. So arms can be in whatever position feels supportive for you. Again, we're going to move on exhale.
So let the breath come in. Exhale, lift up, just the head and chest. Empty, empty space after exhale. I am patient. When the inhale feels ready, let it come. Exhale, lift one leg. Empty, empty, empty space after exhale. Patience. Let the inhale come as it feels ready. And then slowly lower all the way down. Long exhale. As the inhale's ready to come, stay here inhaling. Exhale, just the head, shoulders. Create that space after exhale. Tummy comes in. Empty, 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 empty. Patient. Inhale. The other leg, this time on exhale, lifts. Finding that space. Empty, empty, empty. Patient. Inhaling here. And come all the way down. Do that again one more time on each side, always moving on exhale. So lifting on exhale, just the head and chest. Suspending the breath, that empty, empty, patient space. Inhale, rising. Lift the leg on exhale. Empty, 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 empty. Wait for it. Let the inhale come. Moving on exhale. One last time on the second side. Moving on exhale, head and chest. Empty, 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 empty. Patience. Letting the inhale come. Exhaling. Second side, empty, 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 empty. Patience. Inhale and down. Pause here a moment. And then roll over onto the back. We'll do gentle Apanasana. Simple movement, hands on the knees. Exhale, knees come towards the body. Empty, 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 empty. Pulling the belly in. Once the space is open, just allow the inhale to come. And exhale back down. So being very gentle and attentive to this exhale. In that empty space, just ready to receive. So it's not so much that you breathe in, it's that the atmosphere around you comes to fill your lungs. Couldn't stop it if you tried. As you have the capacity to extend the space after exhale, just notice the quiet. After you complete the next round, just find your way to a seated position, either in a chair or on the floor, on a cushion.
And here, just very simply, we're going to move on inhale, lifting the arms up. And exhale, come down. And again, find that space after exhale. In that quiet, listen to the space between the air. When the body's ready, just let the inhale come. So we don't want to push to agitation. We want to just give the space and then wait. And that space may be longer or shorter than you think. Let the sensations in your body guide you so that there's no irritation, no pushing. Just listen and wait. Continue breathing, listening after the exhale. Listen to the space between the air. And as you feel ready, continue listening, but let go of the movement of the arms. Let go the control of the breath. And let the breath settle as it will, but keep listening. And slowly, slowly bring the fingertips to the sternum.
And bringing both hands to the top of the diaphragm, the place where prana meets apana. The place of balance between inhale, exhale. And just notice the impact on your system. Working with a technique that extends the exhale side of the breath. The exhale connected with lower heart rate, relaxation, parasympathetic nervous system activation. As we complete, just bring the palms of the hands touching for a moment. In gratitude for the inheritance of this body, genetics, nervous system that we have inherited and cultivated to carry us through this life. Lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu. May the treasure of peace that we find be a gift for all beings. Thank you. Feel free to rest where you are and stay in that space. You're welcome to log off without saying a word, or if you'd like to share or connect, I'll be here too. We can talk.
Exhale with the recitation of I am patient. Should we exhale out all the way and then like the last little whiff of air as we're saying I am patient internally, we're letting out a little whiff of air? Okay.
Yeah. So it's a continuation of that, the initial sensation using the audible mantra, building an awareness of what's happening here with the sound, and then feeling the sensation, and then just filling that space with the mantra of spaciousness. I am patient. And this
So
is
any
a
little
practice actually
bit of
from
air left over, we're letting go while we're saying I am patient. We're letting out a little bit of air. Okay, so it's not just like the pause between breath, but it's still a little bit of
that.
exhale.
Yes, still.
I could really feel that on a very deep
it's,
level. That was lovely.
Yeah.
And then tested in real time
really
when my son ran out.
I had the dog visit me, so it's really to give us a really deep sensation of that. When we exhale, there's still a lot there, and so when we really can calmly approach that space, because we try to force it, it creates a lot of irritation in the system, pelvic floor, and things like that. But it's a gentle way to activate that spaciousness, and it is essentially expanding exhale. But it's a new way to find that space, because that true space after exhale is very short. It's just that space is that mild continuation of exhale that we call pause.
Wonderful.
So this
Thank
practice
you.
is also a practice from it's a practice from a teacher named Sri Ram, who's in Germany. He's a teacher, who's a student of Desigachars. He worked at the Mandiram in Chennai. At the time Gary was there, he was a student as well. And so he's from kind of from that community of students. And he's from Chennai, and but now lives in Germany, married to a German woman who studied traditional Indian dance. A very interesting, powerful couple.
Yeah. Sri Ram. Okay. Is that it?
Yeah, I'll give you that.
I know.
And I will send you guys along with some writing. So the guidance for home practice are basically some links to some guided relaxation exercises. I can also, if I have the capacity this week to chop this part of the recording off of the practice, that can be also used as a guided experience.
That'd be great.
Goodbye, Catherine. Bye, Melanie.
Hey. Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye,
Bye.
Lindsay, or do you have something to share? Okay.
No, that was great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Very
you,
helpful.
bye.
Very helpful.
Good.